An old woman can't keep pace. The group is moving at dawn, crossing dry ground before the heat comes, and her knees have given out 3 times already. Every second the group waits for her is a second closer to no water, no shade, maybe a predator catching their scent. So here's the question that should terrify you. Do they leave her? You already know the answer your gut wants to give. Nature is brutal, right? Weak gets cut loose, strong survives. That's the whole deal. That's why gyms sell survival of the fittest on t-shirts. Except that's not what happened. Not even close. And the actual answer says something about why you're alive right now, reading this. At whatever age you are, instead of already dead at 30, like evolution should have arranged. Because here's the uncomfortable math. For most of human history, life expectancy at birth hovered around 30. People love quoting that number to prove old age is a modern invention, a side effect of vaccines and plumbing. But that number is a trap, and it's the first assumption we need to rip apart. Average life expectancy gets dragged down hard by infant mortality. If half the babies born don't make it past age 5, the average collapses, even if plenty of adults are living into their 60s and 70s. Dig into skeletal remains from sites across Europe and Africa, and you find something that shouldn't exist if the tribe abandons the old idea were true. Old bones. Worn, arthritic, healed over, decades-old bones. Someone was keeping these people alive long enough to grow that old in the first place. So, the tribe wasn't ditching grandma at the first sign of a limp. The real answer is stranger and more useful than that, and it's going to change how you think about every useless older person you've ever brushed past. Picture a specific kind of person now. Not the hunter, not the fastest runner, not the best spear thrower. Picture the one who remembers where the water held out during the worst drought 30 years ago. The one who remembers which berries looked exactly like the poisonous ones but weren't. The one who'd survived 2 famines already and knew, from muscle memory, which plants to eat when the usual food ran out. That person is walking slower than everyone else. And that person is also the single most valuable member of the group. Anthropologists call this the grandmother hypothesis, and it's one of the sharper explanations for why humans, almost uniquely among primates, live decades past their reproductive years. Most animals don't get a grandma phase. A chimpanzee's fertility and lifespan track together pretty closely. Human females can live 30-40 years past menopause. That's evolutionarily bizarre. Why would a body keep running that long after it stops doing its job? By strict Darwinian logic. Because the job was never just reproduction. Researchers studying Hadza communities in Tanzania found grandmothers who spent hours a day digging tubers, feeding grandchildren, freeing up the mothers to have more children sooner. An older woman who can't run anymore can still process food, still watch toddlers, still keep the whole group's survival math working in the background while everyone else is busy hunting or foraging. But food and childcare are only the surface layer. Here's the part that gets skipped past too fast. Before writing existed, before anyone could scratch a warning onto a wall, information about the world lived nowhere except inside human skulls. Which berry kills you in 6 hours? Which winter pattern means famine is coming? Which watering hole dries up first when the rains fail? That knowledge had exactly one storage device, a living brain that had already lived through it once. Lose the elder, and you don't just lose a person, you lose the tribe's only copy of decades of survival data. No backup, no cloud storage, no second draft, gone. Which flips the entire premise of the question. The old weren't dead weight the tribe tolerated out of sentiment. They were closer to a hard drive nobody could afford to lose. And that reframes something else too. You've heard the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child." Turns out that's not a warm platitude. It's closer to a literal survival requirement. Human babies are absurdly expensive. They're born helpless. They stay helpless for years. And a mother alone, foraging for herself and feeding an infant, physically cannot gather enough calories to also keep multiple older children alive at the same time. Something had to give. And what gave, according to researchers looking at hunter-gatherer group structures, was the idea that childcare belonged to the mother alone. It got redistributed. Grandmothers stepped into a role no other great ape grandmother fills at scale. The standing safety net for grandchildren she wasn't even nursing. Here's where it gets stranger, and where most explanations of this stop. But the real story doesn't, because knowledge, storage, and childcare explain why old age was tolerated. They don't explain why it was engineered. And the body count backs this up in an unexpected direction. Look at killer whales. Yes, we're leaving humans for a second. Stay with this. Orcas are one of the only other species on Earth where females live decades past the end of their fertility. Researchers tracking resident orca pods in the Pacific Northwest found that post-reproductive females become the pod's lead navigators, especially in lean salmon years, when knowing exactly where food used to be decades ago determines whether the whole pod eats. The old female orca isn't hunting anymore. She's remembering. And pods that lose their oldest female show measurably worse survival in the following years. If the ocean independently evolved the exact same trick humans did, that's not a coincidence, that's a rule. Living memory is worth more than a healthy pair of legs, whether you've got flippers or feet. Now here's the reopen, because this is where the tidy, wise elder story gets complicated, and you need the uncomfortable version too. Not every group had the resources to keep every elder alive. This wasn't a universal utopia of gentle caretaking. Among some traditional Arctic dwelling groups, including documented cases in specific Inuit communities facing extreme famine conditions, there are accounts of elders choosing, themselves, to stay behind during brutal seasonal migrations when the math simply didn't work, when carrying an immobile elder meant risking the survival of children. This wasn't casual abandonment, and it wasn't the norm across human history broadly. It was an extreme, resource-scarce exception, and often framed within those specific cultures as the elder's own choice, a final act of contribution rather than a punishment. The takeaway isn't old age was disposable. The takeaway is that the value of an elder was calculated constantly against brutal, real constraints, and most of the time, in most environments, that calculation came out overwhelmingly in favor of keeping them alive. The exception proves how tightly this system was actually managed, not how casually. So we've got knowledge storage, we've got childcare labor, we've got a whale doing the same math with a different body plan. What's left? The twist. The one piece that ties it all together and explains something happening in your own life right now. Menopause itself. For decades, this was framed as a flaw, a system shutting down, ovaries wearing out. But look at it through everything you just learned, and it stops looking like a malfunction and starts looking like a deliberate handoff. A body that stopped investing energy in producing new offspring, redirecting every calorie instead into keeping existing grandchildren alive. Researchers studying this pattern across both humans and orcas call it the grandmother hypothesis's darker twin, reproductive conflict. An older female and her daughter-in-law in the same group, both trying to raise children at the same time, competing for the same limited food, creates tension that can hurt everyone's offspring. Menopause resolves that competition permanently. The older female steps back from having her own children and steps fully into keeping everyone else's children alive instead. It's not decline. It's a career change, hardwired into the body itself. Evolution rerouting one job into a different, more valuable one. And that's the piece sitting inside you right now, whether you're 25 or 75. Every time an older relative in your life remembers something the rest of the family forgot, every time a grandparent's stubborn insistence on some old habit turns out to be exactly correct, every time you feel that strange pull to listen to someone slower, someone who can't keep up physically anymore, you're not being sentimental. You're running code that's older than agriculture, older than language probably. A survival algorithm that decided hundreds of thousands of years ago that a living memory was worth more than a fast pair of legs. The tribe never really left the old behind. It rebuilt itself around them instead. And somewhere in that dry crossing, in that woman who couldn't keep pace, the group didn't calculate her as a burden slowing them down. They calculated her as the only one among them who'd already survived this exact crossing before and lived to describe how.